Hello, my name is Samet Senai Işık. I am an electrical electronics engineering student at Bilkent University. I have taken Physics 101 course in 2024 semester. This is my lab project video. I have done an experiment with a spring mass system as my project. My objective of the experiment is to decide which factors to affect the period of the mass spring system. The amplitude of springs, the coefficient of springs, the mass of the objects hung on springs are determined as factors to be tested in the experiment. In the experiment, I have used 3 different springs, 4 different masses, and their different configurations to obtain different masses. A ruler to measure the amplitude, a timer, and a smartphone to record the experiment. I have followed the procedure to do the experiment. Firstly, I have determined the coefficient of the springs by measuring the amplitude of the springs when they are in equilibrium. To obtain greater amplitude, I use 90 gram mass configuration. Having obtained the amplitude and force acting on the spring, I determined the coefficient of the spring using Hooke's law. I have taken gravitational acceleration as 9.8 meter per second square. I followed these steps for other springs to obtain their coefficients. Then I divided the experiment into 3 parts for each factor to be examined. For the first part, I used different springs, which mean different spring coefficients. I hung 90 gram mass configuration on the first spring. I set the amplitude to 1.5 centimeters. Then I set free the system. I measured the time for the mass to come back to the point where it started. Since the period of the system was little and this makes it too hard to measure, I counted the mass to come back 10 times instead of 1. To obtain a more valid result, I repeated these steps 10 times, then I took the average of these 10 measurements. I repeated the steps which I explained for the other springs with the same mass and the same amplitude. For the second part, I used different masses to understand the effect of mass on the period. I hung different masses on the spring. I set the amplitude to 5 centimeters for this part. I measured the period in the same way as the first part. For the final part, I set the amplitude different each time to observe its effect on the period. I used the same spring with the second part. I used 90 gram mass. I measured the period in the same way as the other parts. In the end, I plotted tables and graphs for each part using Microsoft Office Excel. As a result of the experiments, I have understood the factors affecting the period of springs better. So, I have demonstrated the mathematical relation between the period of the system and the factors affecting the period. I perceive that the coefficient of spring and masses hung on spring do affect the period of spring mass systems. Mass and period are proportional, whereas coefficient and period are inverse proportional. However, I observe that there is no relation between amplitude and period of springs. Due to conditions in which the experiment has been done, systematic error existed in the experiment. The quality of the material that has been used is not good enough. They were probably used a lot of times in labs, so that they lost their features. Another type of error existing in the experiment is an observational error. Since I have tried to measure a little time amount that's hard to be measured by a human, data obtained from the experiment has not matched with data obtained by using the equation. Moreover, there is a theoretical error due to neglecting effects of the environment that may change the period, such as air friction. To determine the error margin of the experiment, the period formula has been used to compare experimental data and theoretical data. Then, the percentage error values have been plotted. Finally, I have done an experiment as my lab project for Physics 101 2024 semester. This experiment was including a spring mass system. My objective was to determine the factors affecting the period. I learned the relationship between the factors and the period for a spring mass system. In the experiment, there was an error due to the conditions in which the experiment has been done. Thank you for watching.